This is my persuasive speech titled Creating a Sustainable Future, the Key to Preserving Biodiversity. Without nature, we are nothing. The preservation of our beautiful world is critical not only for humans, but for wild animals and ecosystems. But our current agricultural practices are destroying our planet, negatively contributing to things such as climate change, deforestation, freshwater withdrawals, and puts at risk thousands of species. Change is needed now. Today I will be persuading you to support sustainable agricultural practices to preserve biodiversity. Today I will be persuading you to support sustainable agricultural practices to preserve biodiversity based on the experience and research that I have done. In persuading my audience to support sustainable agricultural practices to preserve biodiversity, I will discuss the following: the problem with our current unsustainable agricultural practices, who these problems affect, and finally how supporting sustainable agricultural practices could solve biodiversity. First, unsustainable agricultural practices have led to massive problems such as massive loss of biodiversity on our planet. According to a research paper published on February 2021 by the Chatham House titled Food Systems Impact on Biodiversity, 3 Levers for Food System Transformation in Support of Nature, it retrieved February 9, 2025, states, over the past 50 years, the biggest drive of habitat loss has been the conversion of natural ecosystems for crop production or pasture. The area of land occupied by agriculture has increased by around 5.5 times since the 1600s and is increasing. End quote. As noted, agricultural intensification has led to habitat loss, and this is critical. Not only are animals losing their habitats, but this pushes animals closer to human beings, making diseases such as zoonotic diseases more prevalent to human beings. These diseases can lead to pandemics such as the COVID-19 pandemic that we just experienced. According to an article by Johannes Hofnagel titled Diverse Approaches to Crop Diversification in Agricultural Research, a review published on April 20th, 2020 and retrieved February 8th, 2025, points out intensive agriculture has led to simpler production systems, therefore leading to less diversity in cropping systems. Less diverseness in cropping systems has made it difficult for farmers to adapt to climate change and reduces the amount of land needed by animals. Now that I have discussed the problems with our current unsustainable agricultural practices, I will discuss who these problems affect and finally how supporting sustainable agricultural practices could solve biodiversity loss. Second, there are many people who suffer from biodiversity loss due to unsustainable agricultural practices. Vulnerable groups such as women and the indigenous are severely impacted by the threat of biodiversity loss. According to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, in an article accessed February 8, 2025, titled The UN Calls for Urgent Action to Feed the World's Growing Population Healthily, Equitably, and Sustainably, published April 19, 2021, points out how even though women make up 37% of the world's agricultural employment, they are still at a severe disadvantage in access to land, education, assets, rights, and financial services. Adding to this, Aloika Konago titled The Silent Cry of the Forest, How Deforestation Impacts Indigenous Communities, published on August 8, 2023, and accessed February 8, 2025, states, Indigenous communities, the stewards of diverse biodiversity and cultures, endure the brunt of rampant deforestation in the midst of this crisis. Their ancestral lands, which are essential for sustenance and spiritual practices, are under the threat from the destructive forces of logging, mining, and farming. End quote. Although indigenous contribute significantly to sustainable agricultural practices, they are often overlooked in policymaking and have little to no power to protect themselves from the intensification of agricultural practices today. Having learned the problems and who they affect, it is necessary to support sustainable agricultural practices to reduce biodiversity. Lastly, I will discuss the solutions that can be used to create sustainable agricultural practices in order to reduce the threat of biodiversity loss. According to an article by the World Farmers Organization adopted by the WFO General Assembly June 9th, 2022, titled Research and Innovations for Sustainable and Agricultural and Productive Agriculture and the Global Food Systems, this February 8, 2025, states, Innovation in agriculture, starting from research, can only be done by farmers. based on farmers' needs and knowledge, but for their benefit and the benefit of the natural ecosystem they work in. End quote. Elaborating on this, research or innovation needs to be inclusive and accessible to all, not just people from developed countries. Traditional farming practices are very sustainable, but lack production needed to support the world's growing population. Innovating these practices to not only be sustainable but be productive as well could be extremely beneficial to the world. Another way, um, Another way to create sustainable agricultural practices to reduce the threat of biodiversity loss is adopting agroforestry practices, which have proven to be beneficial and productive. According to the Springer Nature titled Agroforestry and the Environment, published June 16, 2021, and accessed February 8, 2025, defines agroforestry as the practice of deliberately integrating woody vegetation, trees or shrubs, with crops and or animals to benefit from resulting ecological and economic interactions. End quote. Additionally, it highlights the benefit of the adoption of agroforestry for farmers and the environment. Agroforestry promotes eco-intensification and efficiently uses the resources available. Adding to this, the integration of plants and animals into food production helps reduce biodiversity loss because they keep soil filled with nutrients. It only uses the resources it has, so it does not put a strain on water resources, and it is not as labor intensive. It also attracts pollinators and protects against pests, so pesticides are not needed. So far today, my purpose has been to persuade you to support sustainable agricultural practices to preserve biodiversity loss. In doing so, I have discussed the problems with our current unsustainable agricultural practices, who these problems affect, and finally some solutions that can be used to create sustainable agricultural practices to reduce the threat of biodiversity loss. I hope with this information you are able to recognize the severe threat our world is facing today and how it is necessary for urgent change. The information I have provided details problems and solutions, and I hope you consider these solutions and promote the use of sustainable agricultural practices to ensure future generations, ecosystems, and our planet's well-being, so they are habitable and safe for years to come. Thank you for listening to my speech, and I hope with the information I have provided was helpful and informational for you to take a stance on this issue and the importance of supporting sustainable agricultural practices. Thank you.